Can you conceive of a situation where the intellectual people of your day and age want to push a lie? Where scholars will push a lie, college professors, political leaders, church leaders will all propagate a lie? Can you conceive of that? All right, here we are down in my painting studio, and we're going to talk about the transmission of the biblical text again. This will be part 2. Here is a painting I did a while back. This is down in Memphis, Tennessee. This is North 2nd Street. These buildings are no longer there, but that's the way it looked when I drove by it for years going into town. There was a series of houses just like this, and had great big sycamore trees out in front of it, and it was such a delightful place to drive by that I stopped and took a photo of it one day, and so I painted. So let's get right into the subject. Okay, let's go to my drawing pad again. I'm going to try to illustrate this as we go through it. You're going to find this a fascinating subject. Now, I'm talking mainly today about this book called Neither Oldest Nor Best by David H. Sorensen. M.B.A., M.D., D.M.I., I don't know. It's got all those titles by it right there. And so this guy, this guy has revealed something that's been there in history all along, and few people have talked about it, but it's gotten lost in all the Bible. You're going to be absolutely shocked what that has to say about manuscript evidences. Okay, what we're talking about is biblical text. Now, the King James Bible, the 1611 King James Bible, is now out of vogue. We're told that it does not come from the oldest and best manuscripts. Now, when did that idea arise that it didn't come from the oldest and best manuscripts? It arose in 1840 and following. Before that, the 1611 was called the traditional text. Actually, it wasn't even called that because it was the only text. So it was the traditional text. And that traditional text had 6,000 plus Greek manuscripts that supported it. Not only did it have 6,000 plus Greek manuscripts, but it had manuscripts, and we'll deal with that another time, it had manuscripts dating back to their origins. Now, it was not one that was printed or written in the year 125 AD, but Gothic, Syriac, Latin, Italic, Ethiopic, in other words, from Ethiopia, from Syria, where Paul ministered. Those manuscripts, those Bibles were translated way back in 150 AD during the lifetime of the people who saw the Apostle Paul to about 300 AD. Many translations were made of the Bible in multiple languages. So there's 6,000 copies in Greek, and then additional ancient language manuscripts available. Now, the church in Greece, where Paul ministered, where John ministered, where John wrote the letters to the churches of Asia, in that area right there, they received the Bible in the original Greek language, and then they carefully copied it generation after generation. And all the pieces that we have are in agreement that go back in that lineage right there. They tell us that they have the original Greek Bible. They tell us that it is preserved in their Greek-speaking church as they continue to speak the language and read the language in which it was written. They never lost it, never disappeared. It's always been there. They have many facsimiles of it, many copies dating way back into the original early church. And so that's called the traditional text, or it's called the received text, the text that the church has received right down to the very present where I am today. I have a copy of that text in the English language. Now it can be compared, this text I have in the English language, it can be compared to the ancient Gothic. The copies we have would be about 700 AD, but they have a history going back to the earliest centuries. Now it can be compared to the Gothic, and it's the same text. It can be compared to the Syrian text where Paul ministered, same text. The Ethiopian text, it can be compared to the Egyptian text. It can be compared to many of the ancient languages in Europe, and it's the same lineage, the same text, the same Bible in multiple languages. So think of it sort of like this. The original New Testament right here, we'll make it in a Bible form, even though it was probably not in a book like that. The original New Testament is written. And during the first century, the apostles went all over the known world. And when they did, they translated copies of that Bible into those languages. Multiple languages. And then those languages created additional copies down through the ages and comes down to us today. So multiple languages coming down to us today from these ancient languages. And these languages are all in agreement with the English text that we have. That's the way it's been historically. So the traditional text on this side has 5,000 plus. Now listen, when I say plus, there are many ancient Greek fragments, verses, chapters, and portions that have been found that are stuck away in libraries that haven't even been viewed. And when they are viewed, 99% of them, 99 plus percent of them, agree with that historical lineage, that received text that we showed you. 99 plus percent of them. There are a few what we call spurious texts that have been viewed by the church, a manuscript someone put together. The church, during the generation in which it was created, said, nah, bad copy, and rejected it. And so there are minus 1%, just tiny fragment, of spurious manuscripts that have been thrown away by the church and rejected, and maintain this lineage of the majority text throughout history. But it was troubling to the Germans in the middle 1800s. German rationalism comes along, and they want to get rid of the Bible. So they say, well, the Bible has been changed, translated, handed down, and it's full of error. But they couldn't prove it because all these manuscripts vindicate it. So a guy named Tischendorf, 28 years old, who believed that the Bible must be in error because he didn't want to believe the Bible, he was not a Christian, went down to Alexandria, Egypt, and there in Mount Sinai, he found a manuscript, a full Bible, that because it was written on animal skin and not paper, he said therefore it must be at least 4th century or earlier. Because it was written in a style that was pre-4th century, he said it must be an older one. Because it was stained and edges worn and blistered, he said it must be older. So he came back with a portion of that manuscript called the Sinaiticus from Mount Sinai. He came back with that manuscript and he said this predates the Greek manuscripts on which the King James Bible is written. So this one is older, and therefore it's better. Earlier copy. Now, we showed you last week, just because it's earlier, that doesn't mean it's better. You can take something earlier that's been polluted, and that doesn't make it better than something that came later that comes from a pure stream. So when he came out with this, here's what happened. When he came out with this, different scholars like Dean Bergen viewed the content of it and said, no, that's ridiculous. That's a messed up manuscript. But then a guy named Constantine Simonides came forward and said, no, I wrote that in 1839 and 1840. He said, I reproduced that, used coffee stains and tea stains to make it look old, used lemon juice on it. I made that as a gift for the Tsar of Russia. But by the time I got through with it, my uncle helped me do some of the writing on it. And then one of the scribes there in the monastery helped me do some writing. And by the time I got through with it, it was such a mess that I just left it in the monastery down there. And there it was in the library. Tischendorf comes along, goes down into the library, finds that, takes a portion of it home, and says, no, it's old. Simonides comes forward and says, no, it's not. I wrote that. And so scholarship of that day was so bent on believing a lie. Can you conceive of a situation where the intellectual people of your day and age want to push a lie? Where scholars will push a lie? College professors, political leaders, church leaders will all propagate a lie? Can you conceive of that? And so Simonides challenged him publicly. It ended up in periodicals, ended up in newspapers, ended up being debated. Now, here's what Simonides.
I think it's pronounced Simonides.
Simonides?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, now, I just got a correction on the pronunciation. Is Simonides. Okay, so I'll try to remember that, Simonides. I don't have any friends by that name. I don't have any grandkids named that at all. Okay, Simonides, if I can remember it. Okay, this Simonides, Constantine Simonides, comes forward and says, well, on page 237, my initials are there in the corner. On page 522, there's a little mark here. There's a smudge there. He had it all written down in a little book that he kept. He'd placed his initials in order to have like this little identity that it's my manuscript. So that got publicized, and people went to look for it, and guess what they found? They found smeared out spot on that particular page in that particular spot. They found a smudged out spot and damaged canvas over here. All the places where he'd left identifying marks had been removed. So many of the Bible-believing scholars didn't believe that this was a legitimate manuscript. That's what this book, neither oldest nor best, goes into. There's no way I can give you the full content of it, except to tell you you need to get a copy. And by the way, I don't make any money off these. I don't make any money off any of the books from No Greater Joy Ministries. I don't get any royalties. I don't get any profits from the sale of any of these books. All this is strictly a ministry trying to get the truth out to people. I just read this myself and found it a fascinating subject. Read it about a month ago, and I've been wanting to share that with you. So I want you to get a copy of that if you can and read it. Otherwise, there's plenty of books. Last week we talked about In Awe of Thy Word by Gail Riplinger, totally different approach. This is a tremendous book. I love it. And then this is for the layman. Which version is the Bible? Is probably the most fundamental and thorough, touching on all different aspects of the subject. Easy to read. You don't need to be a scholar to understand it. We also purchased the right to print this. The reason we purchased the right is because books will sell for, we don't try to make a big profit on books, just enough to keep functioning. So we will purchase the right to sell a book, and then we will sell it for a lot less than it was originally sold for. And so we acquire those. All right, I'll tell you what, we'll talk some more about this later. But you can have absolute confidence in your King James Bible that it is the text of the church for the last 2,000 years. And only since 1882 and 1901, during that period of time, when a big hoax was perpetrated on the church, and fake Bibles, all 400 English Bibles that have been produced, come from this corrupt text rather than from the main lineage of text that the church has received. Big conspiracy, and you've been suckered into it, many of you. All right, time to come out of that darkness, that veil of darkness that's been pulled over your eyes. That's all for today.
Get your own print of Mike's Revelation painting at ngj.org/revelation. Available as a poster or a full-size banner, and includes a copy of Mike's Revelation Handbook study guide.